Good morning, everyone. I have that it's 10 o'clock, so we are going to get started. If you have used GoToMeeting before and are very familiar with the hands up, raising your hand, would you please lift your hand if you can hear my voice? Do a quick audio check. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Stephanie, Tammy. Thank you very much. All righty. We'll get started. Good morning. My name is Amanda Bice, and I am the Science Program Manager at the Department of Education. Today, my team is joining me, and that includes Renee Shirley Stevens. She is our Content Integration and Special Ed Specialist, and Renee will be helping me with the presentation today. In addition, we have our Keith Crandall, the amazing Keith Crandall, and he will be running support and kind of keeping us in line. He'll be handling the question and chat box. And just doing all around everything to support this webinar today. But we wanted you to see all of our faces. We are the DOE science team, and we are here to support you in your work. If you're just logging on, one of the things I asked you to consider while you were waiting is to think about one of your favorite book characters. This will come up later in our session together today, so take a minute if you haven't and think about one of your favorite book characters. Okay, I hope you have a good one in mind. Try not to forget it in the next few minutes. And I think it was as we approached this time together, and I was thinking about coming together in a webinar with fellow educators this week, and thinking about your gift of time and our shared learning space. I thought we really need to acknowledge kind of where we are, that we are in uncertain days, and that we have a lot on our hearts and minds, a lot more than reading, writing, and science. So I wanted you to know that I appreciate your time today and I value it. And I wanted you to know that your team at DOE, your science team and your science support, that we are educators too. We have family members who are teachers. We are parents. We have children. And so our hearts and minds are full as well. But I want you to remember that it is not selfish and it is not self-centered to take care of yourself. So please, if you haven't checked out our self-care resources on our GaDOE science pages, they are there for you. If you look at the handout section of today's presentation, this PowerPoint has been saved as a PDF and is uploaded there for you to grab. And all of these hot links will be available on that PDF for you to access. So again, you cannot fill a cup if you are empty. And so we want to make sure that you remember, as educators, to take care of yourself. We're so used to helping others that we sometimes forget ourselves. Today we'll be navigating the space. We'll use the hands up, which some of you have already played around with to tell me you could hear me, so thank you. I'll ask your questions and you'll raise your hands and put them down, but you could also do that to alert to get our attention if you want to do that. Keith will probably be monitoring that more than Renee and I, but he can tell us if there's a question or a hand up that we need to address. You'll also see that there's a question chat box on your dashboard. That is where you can respond if we ask you to type in a response, or you can ask your own questions or put in just a general comment when you feel so led. So right now we have all of you muted. We're going to open those mics up a little bit later in the session. Keith will be looking through the list and making sure you look like legit people that we know, and but we will be able to close all those mics if necessary. When we do open them, if you are not speaking at that time, we do ask that you try to keep yourself self-muted. It helps with the audio and the noise and the experience for everyone. We'll also be using a feature today called Slido.com. I am going to put in the chat box because I forgot, so give me just a second. In the chat, you're going to see my lovely screen. Sorry about that. But I'm going to share the link directly. But you can also go to slido.com and type in that password that I had, and I'll show you in just a second. Get my screen back up for you. We'll try to do everything as smooth as possible today. We have plan A's and plan B's for technical crazy, but we will try to show you. So you go to slido.com, it's 565, or you should be able to cut and paste the Slido link that I dropped in the chat box and use that as well. So we'll be using that at least twice today. We're going to also use a poll feature that is inside of GoTo, and that'll just come up on your screen and hopefully will be easy to use. Again, the handouts we're going to use today, you'll see three. I hope you see three. The first one is the PowerPoint for today with all the links for you. And then there are two readings. You don't need to download those right now. You can. You don't need both of them necessarily. It's for a little activity we're going to do in today's session that you'll want to have access to at that time. All right, so hopefully you feel a little familiar with this space. If you need our help, please feel free to reach out in the chat box. All right, so I'd like to begin today by thinking about what it is that scientists and engineers do. So think of a one-word response if you can. That's a little more challenging. And just please type your response into our Slido space. What is it that scientists and engineers do? And I'm going to get over to the Slido space. It might take me just a second if I think I haven't activated this question, so you may not be seeing the right thing just right now. I appreciate your patience. So, poll, oh, I see, good words. I'm going to activate the poll. So those of you who put it in the questions for the Q&A section, thank you so much. I think 8 of you already did. If you would be so kind as to retype those now. Hopefully you are seeing, yes, you're seeing the active poll, yay. Seeing some great words, some fantastic words. All right, thank you to the 14 who participated. And you'll notice that problem solve and create and investigate are large in our word cloud. So those came up multiple times. And oh, more coming up, moving around, seeing it, solutions, explore, question, solve, modeling. Oh, yes, yes, good words. Explore, challenge, analyze data. All very important words. All right, feel free to keep clicking away in there if you'd like. I'm going to switch back to my screen for you so you can see it. It's just a slight delay. There we go. I hope that some of those words, I know I remember seeing some of these words, are what you now see on your screen. These are our science and engineering practices, and we have 8 of them. One of my most favorite things about our SEPs, or our science and engineering practices, is that we teach them in kindergarten, we teach them in middle school, 7th grade life science, we teach them in high school physics. These 8 science and engineering practices are included in every standard K through 12. We are asking questions, we are planning and carrying out investigations, analyzing data, using models, computational thinking, explaining, designing solutions, engaging in argument, and those 3 famous words, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating. One of the reasons that you see every standard in GPS or GSE in the state of Georgia start with obtain, evaluate, and communicate, because when we looked at those 8 SEPs, the group of teachers who were working on the GSE thought that very last practice, which we say for short OEC, encapsulates the other 7. And it really is at the heart of what it is to be a scientist and engineer, is to obtain information, to evaluate it, and communicate it back. So we can obtain information in so many ways. And I like to think about modeling because sometimes I'll look at a model to obtain information, to gather it, to understand something. So I'm using that model and I'm studying that model. But sometimes I'm using that model to predict or to develop some sort of evidence. So therefore, I'm evaluating. And then there's other times when I want to show you what I know. And so I'm developing a model to use to communicate to you what it is that I know. So those practices are very fluid and they're not checklist. They go back and forth, but they also get it while literacy is such a big part of what we do in science. We obtain information in lots of ways, and sometimes that's reading. Sometimes we evaluate by reading. Sometimes we communicate with speaking and writing. And so the literacy to me is so embedded in what scientists and engineers do that it's another reason I just really love the SEPs, not only because we do them in kindergarten all the way through a high school physics course or chemistry, but it's because we also have such rich opportunities to embed literacy in the work that we do. So I have been thinking a lot about student engagement right now. I'm sure many of you have as well. And one of the reasons I've been thinking about it is because I've been thinking about it in terms of a distance learning situation. You know, how do we keep that engagement going? So when this particular photograph and story came across my social media feed, it really kind of spoke to me. So before I tell you about the picture, and you get too distracted by that, I'd like you to just take a few seconds to think about, why do we learn? Why do we even learn? So this is Tallulah. She's a young lady who, since the lockdown, has had a delivery person come to her home. The mom says at least 1 or 2 times every week. And so Tallulah and the delivery man have become friends. She communicated with him by making a thank you card for him, and it's a little poster that he posts in his van, his delivery van, still there. But what you can't tell in this photograph is that the delivery man is deaf. And so Tallulah really wanted and wants to communicate with him more than just by thank you letters. So Tallulah has taken it upon herself to learn sign language. And maybe think about something that you've picked up during quarantine, learning to make bread or learning to play a new instrument. I have a lot of friends into ukuleles right now. And why is that? Why do we learn? And that's kind of the space I want us to spend a little moment in. Why do we learn? And as we think about distance learning, we don't want to fall into that trap of worrying about just the content when we're just pushing the stuff, because then we lose the heart, we lose the engagement, we lose the why humans want to learn piece. So I'd like you to go back to our Slido and just, if you'll give me a little minute to navigate that space. Excuse me, I have another question to post there for you. And I want you to share ways that you have found to build a positive community in distance learning settings. It can be plugged and unplugged. Just share with the group ways that you have thought, or you did, or ways that you've learned about and are planning to implement this school year. Maybe it's an online source that you've used. Maybe it's letter writing, phone calls. All right, I'm starting to see some ideas bubble up. I'm loving these. Mindful, consistent, predictable communication. Don't lecture too long before an interaction. Share your pets. Yes, kids love animals too. I love when people's kids come through. it's fantastic to learn more about people and see their families. I hope you have the ability to scroll through these. We'll leave this one sort of up and live for a little moment, but thank you for sharing things that you're doing and planning to do. In terms of our webinar screen, I'm going to switch back to the presentation. And again, there's a little delay and a lag. So let's continue to think about engagement and the power that we have to connect with our students. And to do that, I think about what our instructional focus has been and continues to be. We teach three-dimensional standards. We utilize phenomena. We develop a classroom culture that supports figuring out, not just learning about. And that science kind of becomes that engine for reading and writing. We want to know and figure out, so now we have a reason and a purpose to read. Tallulah wanted to communicate with the delivery man. When we have something to say, we want to share our findings. So again, there's a reason to write. And we create a sense of wonder and build on student interest. So I always love to promote, and I'm sure many of you on this call today already know about this resource, but it may be new to some of you. It's the GSTA Phenomenon Bank. If you know about it, that's great. If you don't, just go to gstageorgiascienceteacher.org and look for the Phenomenon Bank. If you do know about it, make sure you're making this a richer source than it already is. So that means we have to continue to add phenomenon to this bank when we find them. And so the cool thing about the bank is you can look for it, you can organize it by a particular standard, a particular grade level, and down to a particular element. But it is only good as we in the community make it. So all of us just contribute ideas as we have them, and you can go through and find one that you like. If you don't find one that you like and you later do, then you need to go submit it to the bank so it helps the community. So starting with a phenomenon, if you look at our instructional resources, and at the end of the session today, Renee will take you through finding our resources. If you need to look at our instructional segments, teachers who worked on those found phenomenon that they wanted to use, and their samples there. But maybe you don't find anything there that particularly speaks to you, and maybe you just want a little brain thump of other ideas. If that's the case, we have grab and go cards. And again, we'll show you how to find them in the TRL, but we have for secondary grades 6 through 8 and high school courses, we have grab and go phenomenon cards. They're made in such a way that you could cut them apart and you could work with teachers in professional learning, or you could work with yourself to reorganize them and bundle them in a way that makes it very efficient for you to teach something, or makes connections across content standards that you want to make for your kids. But just a couple of ideas, again, to give you some brain thumps if you're kind of stuck on a particular standard. So today I want to share a phenomenon with you, and it's going to take about a minute to view. And as you're watching this short video clip, I want you to ask questions. You can jot those down, you can just keep them in your head, but I want you to ask questions about what you're seeing and things that come to your mind. Okay, so if anybody wants to share the questions that came to your mind, hopefully you saw that video. Feel free to grab the mic and speak up. Okay, well, we're going to.
This is Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I was just trying to jump in there and break the silence. An early question I had was why the chicks look different than the adults. So that's, and then of course later it kind of shifted more to the plastic and how that was affecting them.
Hi Amanda, this is Deneen. My question was, how did the trash get to Midway Island?
Thank you guys for asking your questions. So I will tell you that two of the most common questions folks have are, where did the trash come from, and why do birds eat the plastic? So for all the people who are shy and didn't want to speak out, which is something I'm also concerned about with our students in distance learning situations, we do have a little poll, and I'm going to start the poll now, and it basically is going to ask you which question you're most interested in. So if you'll take a minute to just answer that poll about which question that either you wondered about too, or you're most interested in now because you had a different question. Okay, so I'm going to wait a few more seconds and I'll close the poll. Got about 80% who have voted, so I'm going to hit close for now, and I'm going to share the results with you. So we have a lot of interest in why are the birds eating the plastic, but pretty equally, where did this trash come from? And those are two things that I would want the whole class to understand, or all of us to understand at some point if we were really doing this in the classroom. So I'm going to hide the poll. And hopefully we're back into the presentation now. So after getting kids to view the phenomenon and to come up with their own questions, I would like to put them in interest group surveys. So sort of think about the question you're most interested in, because we're going to get to it again in just a little second. But I would also want to then engage them in some explorations based on those questions. So like, where does the trash come from? We could do a tracking activity where we look at maps and we look at garbage patches throughout the oceans and where they are and locate them. We could compare, like, why do birds eat them? We could compare the way fragments of plastic look like food sources. Like, do they look like plankton and other food sources when they're broken down into smaller pieces? We could try to compare those types of things. We could simply, even with kids in a home setting, just take a jar or a glass of water and throw some various types of plastic in there and see what happens. So you can also see the photograph, and we can make some observations about what we see happening here. Not to belabor the point or to slow us down much more, but hopefully our students would notice that, and we as adults will notice that these plastics are floating on top. Now there may be other plastics that sink. What happens with some wave action? Do we settle? So some simple explorations, which is cheap and easy to do, right there would help us explore. So, are you primed to read? Why do you want to learn? Are you a little more compelled now that you have your own questions and maybe that you're in groups researching your own questions? I hope so. And I hope that we can chunk reading together to give kids multiple opportunities to read in maybe smaller chunks, to access information, piece things together sort of like a puzzle. So, if you looked in the handout section, you saw that we have 2 readings. There is one, where does the trash come from? That is an article I would like you to read if you are interested in that question, if you answered the poll and that was your the most compelling question to you, or if you were more curious about why the birds are even eating this plastic, pick that article to read. One of the things you can ask kids to do when they're reading, or students to do when they're reading, is to annotate. And for this, we're going to do exclamation point. It's important. Plus, I knew that. X, this is different than I thought. Question mark, I don't understand. Obviously, you're not going to print these out and do that right now, but you can sort of think about that in your head. Or you could use, if you were doing online forms, you could use various colors. You could do all kinds of different things in that setting. So I'm going to set the timer for 4 minutes. I'm going to give you a second to click over to the handout and open one of those documents that you're interested in. And they're very short readings, so I think you'll be fine. Think about the annotations, though, and which ones you would be interested in as a teacher. All of them, I'm sure, but for different reasons. So sort of think about that if you finish reading earlier. All right, 4 minutes. Okay, we have a minute left. I was saying that seemed like the longest 4 minutes of my life, and sort of like waiting on the microwave seems like a really long time. So as you read one of the articles, or maybe you read both of them, what would you be interested in looking for if you were scanning a classroom in a face-to-face setting with kids? What symbol would you be used to, what looked for? And if we could unmute mics, or if hopefully people have control of their microphones now, Keith.
I would think, I would want to know what the students thought was different.
Yeah, that's powerful, right? If something is different than what they thought, so we could be dealing with misconceptions there, or we could be dealing with an opportunity to provide them more information. Any other brave soul that will speak to the community? I think the question mark is pretty telling as well. And if you had an opportunity to pair kids, even in a breakout group, in a Zoom situation, a smaller group, they could pair up or they could talk about things. But also important in this is we're asking questions about this phenomenon that we saw, all this plastic and these birds and these, birds consuming all this plastic. So what did you read that had an exclamation point beside it? What did you find in the readings that was important? Again, this is an open mic opportunity.
Hello, this is Cassidy Moore. What was important is that the young birds are dying from this plastic consumption.
Could someone follow? Oh, hey, Marlee.
Hi. I think it's important that something I throw away improperly could end up killing some of the wildlife out there.
So getting at that question, where does trash come from? Some of it comes from us. Right, so there's a personal connection there. Thank you for sharing. All right, we're going to move to the next slide because I'm not going to force you to speak a lot. I think you get the idea. I think we also have to be aware of emotional stress and cognitive load when we're talking about a subject like this, where we're thinking about kids. My sound is muting itself. It's doing something crazy. But I was going to say, we have to be aware of emotional stress and cognitive load when we talk about topics like this, but also as our kids are dealing with the realities of COVID and are dealing with learning, we have to always be thinking about the emotional stress and cognitive load. I think it's kind of important to, even with high school students and middle school students, is to still use picture books. And with adult learners, which is I'm trying to use this activity with you as adult learners to learn things, is a great book called One Plastic Bag. And this is a solution, like looking for solutions and things we can do. Like Marlee was saying, I realize if trash I leave can cause a problem, then I can take care of not leaving trash, not being a litter bug. But this is a group of women in Gambia who saw a problem, which was plastic trash bags littering their community. And they took those bags and they found a solution. They wove them together and made fabric mats, wallets, purses, and they sold them in the market. And they made a lot of money, and they created a workforce for even the women in their community. So it's a great story. And it's also important to have multiple stories about multiple people, multiple places, and multiple ways for kids to connect to people they see in stories. we would be obtaining information even from that picture book, but we could also obtain information from other great sources. And I think about the National Geographic's recent, it's communicating information just in that artwork. When you first look at that cover, you're thinking about an iceberg, and if you look carefully and more closely, you begin to see that that's a white plastic bag. And so you can lead into obtaining information from a lot of sources and even art. So I think there's a lot of power in story. And we as science teachers can take advantage of that story. And you will see resources like creating storylines. And it's also just reminds me that there's power of a phenomenon. And when you introduce your lessons with a compelling, makes me want to learn phenomena, something I want to figure out, then you kind of craft a story around that event. And then as a learner, I am totally engrossed and engaged. And this particular topic generally prompts a lot of discourse, a lot of discussion, and students want to do something. They want to be like the women of Gambia. They want to do something, but you can channel that desire and that want into writing. So I don't know if you've ever played Never Have I Ever, but never have I ever done these things. But when I say these things, if you have done them, I want you to raise your virtual hand. So if you'll go back to where you can see the attendees list and you see your name, there's a little hand signal that looks like that, and you can click and you can raise your hand. So never have I ever put off writing a thank you. If you have done that, would you raise your hand? Would you be honest? It's true confessions time. Oh my gosh, some of you have put off writing thank yous. Okay. How about never have I ever avoiding writing an email? I actually have. I have one in my draft box right now. It's been there for days. All right, thank you for your honesty. Never have I ever procrastinated in writing a report of something, something for school, something for work. All right, I see I'm not alone. There's some guilty people here. And then the final one, never have I ever started to keep a journal, but then stopped. The point I'd like to make here is that writing is hard work, right? And so we need to respect that. If we as adults and as educators can raise our hand that we have struggled with writing something at some point, we know it is hard work. And so we need to help our students. So types of writing that I could see after an event like this or after a lot of phenomena that you introduce with your students is an opportunity for an op-ed letter, a letter to a representative, some sort of informational video or commercial or an infomercial, school news report. And then there are things that you can do that will make your life easier in this space. So pre-writing strategies like letting kids talk about it, letting kids communicate, let them share their experience and express their feelings. If they're making a claim, where should they look for evidence? Maybe you just create a Padlet or on your board, ideas of good resources and places they would want to look. You could even list phrases on the board that are related to the science that they will need to include. You can be a little bossy. You can say, I need you to at least include these 3 terms, ecosystems, pollution. I need to see that at least somewhere in your writing. So you can be a little bossy. You can make some rules. You are the teacher. You could brainstorm with the group words that might be useful, words that might help them in this writing to kind of get them thinking in the right direction, to prompt them, and then deciding together if this is formal or informal, what language is needed here. Sometimes when we write, it's a ticket out the door. I really don't need formal language. Informal is fine. But when we're going to perform something for the school news, we need to get to a place of formal language. So we could also provide writing frames. And at the department, we have some of these resources for you that we'll talk about in just a few slides. But don't forget creative writing. Yes, science teachers, even in science class, creative writing can be a good food for the brain. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my ideas about integration as a strategy when we are in this distance learning time, but even when we're not. Even in secondary, working with our ELA teachers, if we're self-contained elementary, it's pretty easy. Finding ways to look at our standards and be efficient with our time and instruction and bundle ELA standards with science standards. So utilize your creative writing by thinking about your favorite character. If some of you logged in late, you didn't see the first slide, but on the first slide while you were waiting in the waiting area, I asked you to think about your favorite book character. And I hope you did. And if you didn't, I hope you can quickly think of a favorite book character. But I want you to imagine that book character watching the Midway Island video. Watching that video, reading the readings, doing the explorations, and realizing that trash from even our country is getting to this remote island, that the birds are skimmers, they skim the top of the ocean to feed, they get full, they don't realize they don't have the nutrients they need, they go regurgitate into their baby's mouths, the babies fill up with inappropriate matter, plastic and trash. What would your character do in this situation? So I'll start off. I'm going to share one. I was thinking about Hermione in the Harry Potter series. There is evidence that she was very good at spells. Even though she was a muggle, she was very good at the spells course. She excelled in the spells class. And she also was friends with Hagrid. And you'll remember that Hagrid, there's evidence that he took care of the creatures. So I think she would enlist Hagrid to go to this to the ocean and to talk to all the animals in the ocean and tell them to leave the area. And then I think she would craft a spell that would make all the trash disappear. And that is based on evidence of her friendship with Hagrid and her ability to do well with spells. Anybody else brave enough to share their favorite character and how their character might respond in this situation?
I'll be brave here. It's Anne Marie. I've been hanging out with my grandchildren some, so Pete the cat, I think, is currently my favorite character. And I think that he would go and communicate with the animals and get some support, although cats don't like water, so that's a big obstacle that he may face.
That's using evidence. Yeah, cats don't like water, so maybe we'd have to make a raft for Pete to think about that. Maybe Pete likes airplanes. Thank you for being brave and sharing.
Jeremy Thatcher would want people to recognize what they were doing wrong. So he would get his friends together and talk to them about what they could do so that there was less trash going in the oceans, not expecting people from far away to be able to solve the problem, but begin solving it in his own home.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing, guys. We're going to go on to the next slide. So reading and writing and science is the perfect combination. That's the title of our event today, but it's tell you a little bit more about that title. But it is my belief that science fuels the learner's curiosity to want to read and provides a real reason to write. So obtain, evaluate, and communicate is really, really important. I do have a little fear that I will share with you. Because we start every single standard with obtain, evaluate, and communicate, I think because we're also human, that it would be very easy to just start glancing over that part. Let me get to that content. Let me just scan over it. Let me skip OEC, right? And move along. But I want you to remember today, and I want you to remember story, and I want you to remember phenomenon, and I want you to remember how important it is to obtain, evaluate, and communicate, because that's what scientists and engineers do. So we are not going to be human and fall into the ignoring those words trap. Good science to me equals good reading and writing. They just go together. And I'm going to take an elementary example here. And most of you probably remember as you're being a child yourself, this is a pretty common thing we teach no matter what state you're in or where you're learning. Life cycles, it's important, right? So here in Georgia's second grade, this child has made a model. She's drawn what she's seeing. She's observing, and she sees little dots on the cup. So she asks, what are those things on the cup? And the teacher doesn't give the answer. She asks that she continue to observe for some more days. So the student is measuring. She says her painted lady grew 1 more centimeter because yesterday it was 2 and today it's 3. So actually she is using mathematical computational thinking here. Her teacher gives her great commentary and says, I loved how you use mathematics to explain your reasoning. So there's lots of good science language happening in this interaction. Then you're going to see how this teacher had the butterflies. The teacher across the hall had the chickens. And so now they're asking them to evaluate, to really think about those two life cycles and compare them. And you can see this is that informational writing rubric. There's a first draft, final draft. What a beautiful way to integrate your ELA standards and your science standards. And I hope that you see evidence here of obtaining, evaluating, and communicating. Here, the student to me is using the models to communicate what he or she knows, sharing with a teacher that I know the stages that a chick goes through and that a butterfly goes through. They have obtained evaluation by doing great observations. They saw butterflies in their classroom, and then across the hall they saw chicks. And they're communicating back to the teacher in an informational writing piece to compare those two. Beautiful, so much SEP there, so much content there, and so much LEA there. So was it a science lesson or an ELA lesson? I just pulled a couple of the ELA standards out. Take a minute just to glance over those. It's so logical, such a logical connection to our science standards. So they were doing both. Even with a SEP like plan and conduct, that in my mind is very much a hands-on, very much a do, an action, a verb, right? So my kids are planning and conducting an investigation. But we're looking here at the 5th grade standard when they're looking about magnetic, you're using magnets, magnetism. And here's a child presenting their plan to the teacher. They're going to see if they can connect the magnets through water, through air, or through glass. And I hope you can read some of that. But that's their child's plan, and that's what they presented to their teacher to communicate their plan, to get approval, and to get the information they needed and the supplies they needed to actually conduct the investigation. So that planning part of it became the writing piece in that classroom. So what we've done is we've worked with author Jody Wheeler-Toppin. She's an NSTA Press author. She's a former science teacher in the state of Georgia. She grew up in Savannah, and she has developed a video series for us called Reading, Writing, and Science, The Perfect Combination. So after today's session, if you want to know a little bit more about the annotations, sentence frames, strategies like that are very practical, I'd like you to go to see our videos, and they're on our GaDOE website, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is very small print. I don't expect you to read it, but I just want to remind myself to remind you that there are actually 13. We have 4 vignettes, like they're all probably less than 12 minutes, 15 minutes. 4 for elementary, 4 for secondary, and then we have 5 that are appropriate K-12. And it's about integrating writing and science, reading and science, how you deal with claims, evidence, and reasoning, and then sentence frames and using signal words to help kids become better readers, using their prior knowledge, how background influences their comprehension. And then she has some more great pre-writing and evaluation things you could do for writing. I shared a couple of her hints with you in the PowerPoint today, but she has more, and so I hope you'll really check those out. Another one I'd like to make you aware of is the very last one for K-12 is integrating reading, writing, and science in the K-8 classroom. It's in a call to action for administrators. There are a lot of administrators who want to include more science in those grades, and for those administrators who are looking for creative ways to do that, this might be helpful to them. And as we think about this distance learning setting, and we think about the time our kids are going to have attention to learning, what's reasonable based on their age, I hope that we will consider ways to integrate, ways to partner with our teachers in other content areas to provide those real world connections. Because one of the reasons Tallulah wanted to learn was because she wanted to connect to a real person. And me as a learner, I like to connect to the real world, to something that's interesting and compelling and relevant. So I'm going to turn the slides over to Renee for a minute, because I think it's good to hear a different voice. And so Renee, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. I want to talk to you a little bit about some resources that you can use. The first one is the videos that Amanda was just talking about. And you can find them both on our Georgia DOE science page. You have to scroll down about halfway to find the list of science videos, and you will see that they are all hyperlinked there. You can also find them on the TRL, the Essential Toolkit, in the Need to Know bucket. And it contains a PDF that actually has links to the videos as well. So when you want to find the TRL, you can log into SLDS and click on the TRL tab, and then it will take you to the next page, and you click on Essential Toolkit. You can also access this through the public link, which is available on the Georgia DOE Science page as well. You just kind of have to scroll down, and it's in Instructional Resources for Teachers. You can click on that public link, and it will take you here as well. And it looks like this, where it actually has buckets, where it is divided. So you can find the resources in What Do I Teach, which contains the standards, How Do I Teach, which contains our instructional segments, Did They Learn, which is some of the assessment guides, and then Need to Know, we have our facts there, as well as one of the supporting distance learning resources that the content integration specialist put together. You can also find all of our instructional segments, which have support in the How Do I Teach bucket, self-evaluation checklist for the students to evaluate their own learning, then that supporting distance learning document, which contains some lessons that are integrated, all 4 content areas that you can use, as well as our video list of these literacy videos and the playlist of the professional learning videos that we've been making as, you know, we've kind of moved into this distance learning kind of environment. So the question, what about speaking? We've talked a lot about reading and writing today, but discourse is very important. Students need to be talking about science content, about even about the practices as they're moving through learning about figuring things out. So there are some resources available on OpenSciEd, and this is a link that you can click to get there. And it also has the link written out so that you can find that information about teaching remotely as well. I also want to talk about some tools that you can use. The first one is Rewordify. It will actually take any text. You can find any text. It is free to use. You just copy the text, go to Rewordify, and paste it into the box. You can go into the settings and change the level that it will rewordify the text into based on the needs of your students. And it makes the text easier to access for students that have difficulties with reading and comprehension. The next one is summary.com. It summarizes text to make the information more accessible. You can copy and paste the text into the box, and it will summarize it for you. You can set the word count for how long you want the summary to be. And then, of course, I encourage everyone to read it and make sure it contains the information that you really want your students to get from it before you just copy and paste it wherever you're taking it. News in Levels provides news articles in 3 levels to make text more accessible, but make sure that the information that students are getting are the same. And it also has a place where videos will read the text to the students. So the wonderofscience.com has graphic organizers for the SEPs and cross-cutting concepts to make it a little easier for students to keep up with information. And then readingworks.org has free reading passages and articles for you to find. Some other tools that you can use, Natural Reader. It's a free program online that can read aloud for students. Also keep in mind that Microsoft Word has a read aloud feature as well that you can use. And then you can also take advantage of speech to text when you're asking students to write for you. It allows them to put their thoughts down by turning their speech into text. As long as they have access to a microphone, they can do this on Microsoft Word and on PowerPoint. If you have more questions about using this in your classroom, you can find information about Microsoft Word and PowerPoint in a video that the content integration specialist did about virtual teaching. It's also in that professional learning playlist.
So thank you all for your time and attention today. It's 10:57. We really tried to keep this under an hour. If you have a few more minutes, if you would go to this bit.ly link, /science post, you have to have a capital S and a capital P, and give us a little feedback about today. We'd really appreciate it. We'll hang around for a few more minutes if you have questions. We'll leave your mics open. We also have our emails. They're going to be in the PDF if you want to download that handout now if you haven't already. You can reach out to us anytime. Thank you again. And we're here for you, and we want to go on this journey together, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much.